Senegal's President MackySall has been experiencing the most serious crisis since coming to power. Now, this West African state has recently been rocked by deadly street protests following the arrest of populist opposition leader OusmanneSonko. He says charges of rape against him are politically motivated. President Sall addressed the nation and appealed for calm after violent demonstrations left several people dead.
A night of celebration after days of protests. There he is, released on bail. OusmanneSonko addresses the nation in this press conference. By his side are leading figures of Senegal's opposition.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya, and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today, which is focusing on the recent unrest in Senegal, which unfortunately resulted in loss of life and material damage. The second part of our program will look into the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in Africa amid concerns over delayed vaccination after rich Western countries acquired more doses of the vaccines than they need. Stay tuned till the end of our show. We have a lot in store for you, and don't forget to send us your comments through our social media handle as you watch the show.
The arrest of Senegalese opposition leader OusmanneSonko early March resulted in a series of demonstrations in the country's capital, Dakar, that left at least 5 people dead and hundreds of arrests. Supporters of Sonko are angry at what they say is corruption, French influence in its former colony, and the poor state of the economy. Sonko finished third in the 2019 election, which saw President MackySall win a second term in office, and is considered a future presidential contender in the West African state. Following the violent protests, Sonko was released on bail after facing accusation of rape and making threats. Prior to his release, hundreds gathered outside a courthouse in Dakar, waving flags and chanting "Free Sonko," before beginning to march as army tanks patrolled downtown streets. The unrest was the worst the country has seen in years. Sonko claims he is being targeted as part of a project to wipe out democracy in the country.
What is going on is nothing more than a project to wipe out our democracy. Every time a dictatorship has been allowed to settle and prosper, it is because an overwhelming majority of the people abdicated before a tiny minority, which played on their fears. Nothing can resist the will and courage of people.
Speaking after several days of violent demonstrations, President MackySall announced the easing of curfews that had been installed to quell the spread of the coronavirus. Those protocols have been widely unpopular among workers in the informal economy. He said he understands frustrations faced by many people in Senegal.
That a generation faced with so many hardships expresses its unhappiness is quite understandable to me. At the same time, let's avoid participating in anything that delays us in the quest for a better future. When you ransack a business, when you attack the goods of others, you don't create jobs, you destroy them.
For analysis on the political crisis in Senegal, we contacted Julius Mbaluto, a London-based political analyst. Thanks a lot, Mr. Mbaluto, for your time. Now, to start off, in your opinion, what's the source of the current crisis in Senegal?
The current protest we see in Senegal started the moment the opposition leader OusmanneSonko was arrested, and of course he was arrested on charges of rape. But a lot of people, a lot of Senegalese people see that as a strategy or a ploy by the government to contain the bigger issues that they've been protesting about.
During the March protests in Senegal, many shops were looted, especially those owned by French companies. An employee of one of the looted supermarkets speaks here on what happened.
Prenez les images. Je suis un membre de PASTEF au Parti Satini.
The heavy presence of France is felt across Senegal. French troops have a garrison in the capital, Dakar, which is also home to France's largest embassy in sub-Saharan Africa. The country still uses the colonial-era CFA franc currency. Most Most people in Senegal clearly feel that the heavy presence of France is part of the problem, and this was expressed during the protests by opposition supporters. However, many people in Senegal also oppose the violence and blame the protesters for attempting to burn down the country.
def nañu délégation coggal lañu def ñëw uniquement pour attaquer mairie bi seulement ñun ñoo am ci sax ba nga xamante si biir jëm yàq lii mais ne dafa rafetul parce que ñu tam ay sénégalais comme ñoom ñun on s'en fout de Sonko wala de Macky Sall xam lan moo ñu dalee suñu teranga bopp yox suñu jabar yox suñu doom ñu nekk fi ñoom nañu calculer loolu ñu tam ay sénégalais lañu comme ñoom.
Following the deadly protests, which impacted negatively on the country's economy and image, the government of Senegal vowed to arrest perpetrators of the violence.
Seront recherchés, arrêtés, poursuivis et traduits devant la justice. Dans ces circonstances, le gouvernement appelle les populations et toutes les forces vives de la nation au calme, à la sérénité et à l'apaisement.
Mr. Mbaluto, you earlier talked about the bigger issue that led to the protests in Senegal. Now, can you elaborate and tell us what exactly are the opposition supporters demanding?
A lot of youthful people have been criticizing about corruption, charges of corruption, and at the same time, a huge chunk of youthful people have got no jobs. They go through unemployment, and of course, they don't see a greater future with the current government. The French factor is also an issue a very key issue to reckon or to focus on.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mbaluto, for that. Now, you have mentioned there the French influence in Senegal. We have seen that during the recent protests in Senegal, French-owned shops and businesses have been specifically targeted by irate protesters. What's the reason for this?
French domination, when we talk about French troops around, that goes down to the local, the populace, all the masses of the people. When they hear that, probably then all the problems that they go through every day, with the government as well in power, that is not listening to them. Definitely you see the idea that the feeling is already there that, okay, our problems are about the French being around. And that's why you see when the protest starts, they also target French businesses and shops, and everything that also relates to the French being on the ground and dominating in business and military and all. Definitely that's the source of the problem, and that's why the French businesses get attacked.
Is the government listening to the demands of the protesters?
When you look into number one, why people are protesting is just because they haven't been listening. You see, the thing is, when people take to streets, they take to streets because there was nowhere else to go. If the government was listening, definitely they would have had a mechanism to handle any criticism, any grievances, and at the same time, you see Senegal, if that was happening, then it would be like their grievances are hitting a brick wall. The thing is also in terms of, if you were to find out in terms of who is the voice of the people, everything that happens that concerns people is always channeled through the media. But actually, as we speak, the Senegalese media is been very tortured, it's been frustrated. Their efforts have been frustrated at the same time.
Senegalese opposition leader OusmanneSonko has been released under judicial supervision. This measure has probably restored some calm in the country, even if it is far from putting an end to simmering political tensions in the country.
Now, things are still restive in Senegal. What's going to happen, especially in the run-up to the 2024 elections?
Although there is this moment of calm, what the government needs to find out is what can be done to address the grievances of the people. Because, without addressing those grievances, that moment, it's just like a ticking time bomb, waiting another trigger. And when that trigger happens, eruption happens. So therefore, it should be the government now thinking or taking this opportune time of a bit of calm to ensure they address all the grievances that have been raised by the people, and also ensure they also embrace free press so that the media can also be used to educate and maybe talk to masses of people.
Well, there you have it. Mr. Mbaluto says that the government in Senegal needs to listen to the people's grievances. Now, let's go for a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about COVID-19 vaccine nationalism and apartheid. Don't go away.
COVID-19 vaccine apartheid.
The global scheme to deliver COVID-19 vaccines to poorer countries faces a very high risk of failure, potentially leaving nations home to billions of people with no access to vaccines until as late as 2024. Now, internal documents indicate that the World Health Organization's COVID-19 vaccine program, known as COVAX program, lacks funds, supply risks, and complex contractual agreements, which could make it impossible to achieve its goals.
A recent report by an international campaign known as ONE indicates that the richest nations are on track to end up with over 1 billion excess doses. Such numbers have prompted World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom to warn that small countries could miss out on vaccines because they have less bargaining power than big countries. WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom has already issued a warning over vaccine inequality.
I said that the world was on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure unless urgent steps were taken to ensure equitable distribution of vaccines. We have the means to avert this failure, but it's shocking how little has been done to avert it. The gap between the number of vaccines administered in rich countries And the number of vaccines administered through COVAX is growing every single day and becoming more grotesque every day.
Winnie Byanyima, UNAIDS Executive Director, has also warned that today the world is witnessing vaccine apartheid that is only serving the interests of powerful and profitable pharmaceutical corporations. Now, to get some insight on the apparent discrimination in distribution of COVID-19 vaccines globally, we contacted Nefta Freeman, a coordinating committee member of the Black Alliance for Peace. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Mr. Freeman. Now, can we say that African countries are now victims of COVID-19 vaccine apartheid?
Yes, I think that, the cases of vaccine nationalism or apartheid would be demonstrated in the fact that, only about 20% of Africa produces its own, pharmaceuticals. There's no real pharmaceutical plants in Africa. It's only about 4, maybe South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, and Egypt to produce their own. And that means 80% of the continent is importing pharmaceutical and medical supplies. So this is probably as a result of colonialism and the fact that Africa has been relegated to not producing, but only extracting raw minerals and not being able to manufacture finished goods for itself, also to be able to benefit the markets. The other part of it, the nationalism, is the military response, the constant military response to any kind of epidemics like COVID and even Ebola. We saw the U.S. and the Western countries and their militaries involved, and the fact that they're providing it a condescending, paternalistic relationship speaks to the national and the nationalistic and apartheid nature of the vaccine and also just response to COVID in general.
Thanks for that insight, Mr. Freeman.
A network of 13 African countries joined forces with global researchers to launch the largest clinical trial of potential COVID-19 treatments on the continent. Yet, despite their contribution, African countries are not benefiting from their contribution and now have to wait long and are paying more for the vaccines. South Africa is one of the countries that took part in clinical trials for vaccines now being manufactured by major Western pharmaceutical companies. The country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has warned against wealthy countries bulk buying and hoarding coronavirus vaccine doses.
We are concerned about vaccine nationalism. The rich countries of the world went out and acquired large doses of vaccines from the developers and manufacturers of these vaccines. And some countries have even gone beyond and acquired up to 4 times what their population needs. And that was aimed at hoarding these vaccines. And now this is being done to the exclusion of other countries in the world that most need this.
President Paul Kagame of Rwanda has also warned of global economic consequences of delayed vaccination in Africa. He also called on African countries to demand for equity in distribution of vaccines.
Africa should speak with one voice on the importance of global vaccine equity, both now and in the future.
Now, Mr. Freeman, African countries took part in vaccine trials, yet many of them will be among the last to fully vaccinate their populations. Now, what's your take?
These are a result of the global power dynamics born out of colonialism. Africans are used for testing. They went and sought for Africans for the trial runs of the vaccines. But once they're considered safe enough for the Western world, then Africans are pushed to the back. If African countries in Africa were self-sufficient, we wouldn't have to participate in their trials or their testing, or be dependent on the West for drugs and other medical supplies. And so this is a result of the white supremacist, capitalist, and patriarchal nature of the West, and particularly the United States. I think that the United States is a dominant player on the African continent, and their competition with China there. And then we also wouldn't have to allow the West, the militaries of the West in, because their militaristic response to this thing also further entrenches their militaries on the continent.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Mr. Freeman.
What's really driving vaccine nationalism and appetite? Well, according to estimates last year, executives at some major Western pharmaceutical companies made $500 million selling rapidly inflating corporate stock. Moderna's executives accounted for the main bulk of this on the basis of a vaccine made entirely with public funding. Pfizer expects to make $15 billion this year off its vaccine.
Back to you, Mr. Freeman. Now, how are African populations receiving vaccines, especially those manufactured in Western countries, considering the fact that there have been concerns over the safety of some of these vaccines?
It's been projected that the African Union has been ordering, en masse these vaccines because it's based on capitalism. I mean, it's not looking good. It looks like the first that a lot of the continent is not going to really have the vaccine available until June, whereas obviously other countries are already vaccinating their populations. But if we look to the global South is more involved, less capitalistic and more socialist, and we look into countries like Cuba and China, I'm sure that would be a better thing.
Now, developing countries are not only having a hard time securing COVID-19 vaccines as richer countries snap up production, but also some are paying more as well. For instance, South Africa bought doses of Oxford AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine at a price of 2.5 times higher than most European countries. Despite these hurdles, the World Health Organization in Africa remains optimistic and says 600 million doses of COVID-19 are expected to be delivered in the continent by the end of 2021.
In Africa, COVAX is targeting phased delivery of 600 million doses by the end of 2021. This is based on 2 doses per person and is aimed to cover the initial 20% of the population in African countries.
Mr. Freeman, what's your take on the current distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in Africa?
African populations are not really receiving, as we said, not really being provided. Other richer countries are able to buy up the supplies from these for-profit big orders from these for-profit companies, pharmaceutical companies, and then the countries in Africa, which are often cash-strapped, aren't able to make these large orders. And if it wasn't ordered on for-profit motives, then you would have, and was also based on cooperation, global cooperation, humanistic people first before profit, then we might be able to see a more equitable distribution in terms of receiving the vaccines or any kind of treatment, really, for the COVID. I don't believe that the vaccine is the necessary or the only way to bring the pandemic under control, but it serves the profit motives to promote it as such.
Even as African countries express concern over unequal distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, there is need to build capacity for the continent to produce its own vaccines and pharmaceutical products. This will also build trust of many Africans who do not trust vaccines manufactured by Western pharmaceuticals. The Egyptian Drug Authority has already approved the manufacture of the first doses of an Egyptian COVID-19 vaccine. In South Africa, the BioVac Institute, a Cape Town-based joint venture between the government and private sector, is also working on the production of up to 30 million COVID-19 doses per year. It's quite clear that the COVID-19 pandemic will accelerate local vaccine production in Africa.
Well, on that positive note, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today. Send us your views and comments through our social media handle. And thanks a lot for watching, and goodbye for now.